Oh, right.
Oh, did it go away? Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to like get the sound working.
Ooh.
You'd think I would use. Okay, so for those that don't know what this is a video of U.S. soldiers gunning down citizens and journalists in Iraq. And this was a video that was given by Chelsea Manning to WikiLeaks, and then WikiLeaks edited it for maximum effect and released it. So most of you guys have probably heard of it if you didn't see it, right? But one of the things that I find really interesting is the backstory to this video. And it actually concerns the world of journalism in a pretty profound way. So the collateral murder attack was on July 12th, 2007. A video of the attack, not necessarily the full video, we don't really have the details, and photographs taken on the scene were shown to Reuters editors in an off-the-record briefing in Baghdad on July 25th, 2007. And they were allowed to see it because it was their own journalists who were killed. So they wanted to see this video. They knew that there was video taken. So the U.S. military said, okay, if you want to publish about this, if you want to talk about it, you have to use the Freedom of Information Act to get copies of it, right? This is the channel that we can use in order for you to get the video, see the video, and perhaps write about the video. So who knew that Reuters actually had seen the video and wanted the video? Okay, exactly. And it's also interesting that this isn't commonly known.
Yes.
I mean, it's out there, but when Collateral Murder was published and everyone was talking about it, this part of the story just didn't quite hold. All right, so what happens? 2 years pass. So basically, as of April 2009, what happened? The U.S. Central Command, which oversees the U.S. military in Iraq, said it had identified 8 collateral murder-related documents, but was withholding 2 because they were classified, and released 6 others in redacted form with classified portions blacked out. These documents did not include the video, and instead selectively showed the presence of weapons on the scene, including AK-47 rifles and an RPG-7 grenade launcher. So basically, the information that was given made it seem like, well, the shooting was completely justified, because the question was whether those soldiers could tell whether they were journalists because they were carrying equipment or where they were carrying rifles. And that's one of the reasons why it was released, because if you do watch the video, it does seem like one can identify the fact that it was photo equipment, right? So you have this. Well, Chelsea Manning saw the video in February 2010 while she was still in the Army. She was he back then. She researched the attack. She read that Reuters' Freedom of Information requests were being refused. And then this is what she said. The fact that neither CENTCOM or multinational forces, Iraq or MNFI, would not voluntarily release the video troubled me further. So she leaked the videos to WikiLeaks shortly after so that Reuters could access it, according to her pre-trial personal statement. So I find this very interesting because journalistic outfits kind of knew of the video. They had seen the video. They were trying to access the video to kind of release it, but they were stuck. They were stuck. I mean, maybe they weren't stuck. Maybe they should have just published anyways, which is a question I'll get to later. But it was because of this leak that was facilitated by a hacker organization, WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, that we got this information out. And basically, since then, this was kind of the mothership leak in some ways. There was leaks before, there have been obviously leaks after, but this was incredibly important in so many different ways. And it was so important, I think, because unlike maybe some of the future leaks, this was something that it seemed like most of the American population wanted to see. It was also the case that a lot of war images had been very much blocked out from the press, and this was the first time that there was kind of an unadulterated set of images around this war that had been going on for a very long time. So it really kind of had this profound effect, I think, both among journalists, among the public at large, and then among hackers. It kind of like, you know, they already had a propensity to leak in certain ways, but this really kind of opened the gates and water kind of flooded afterwards. Now, what was interesting in the long run about Assange, who helped run this organization, WikiLeaks, is that he had a very interesting relationship with journalists, right? And, you know, books can kind of be written on it. He worked quite extensively with a lot of journalists in New York Times, El País, The Guardian, but was also heavily criticized by a lot of journalists too for not taking certain actions to redact information and because of his view of secrecy. So in many ways, while I think the relationship between hackers and journalists is one more of friends than foe, I do think Assange is frenemy number one, probably. And if you could read that up there, I'm going to take something out I want to read here. Yeah, he's got a kind of very ambivalent relationship. And certain news organizations and journalists respect him, others don't. And this quote is from the New York Times, an op-ed by Thomas Friedman, who does not have a very positive take on Julian Assange because he feels that, you know, extensive leaking with no regard to secrecy is not good for the state. And I got this quote actually from a book, Beyond WikiLeaks, which is quite good, Implications for the Future of Communications, Journalism, and Society, for those that are interested. And this chapter I'm going to read from is by Yochai Benkler, another lawyer, who, after quoting this, has this to say about that op-ed. So this is now Yochai Benkler, not Friedman. As a factual matter, quote, a country where they throw whistleblowers in jail is in fact the United States. They, read, we Americans have been keeping Bradley Manning, the only whistleblower involved in this case, in solitary confinement since his arrest in 2010. But the important insight from this op-ed is the expressed fear of anarchy and the fear that the decentralized network, with its capacity to empower individuals to challenge their governments or global banks, is not democracy but anarchy. So then he says, the fact that the individual in question did not in fact, quote, dump out all the internal communications of a government, but rather partnered with major traditional news outlets, including the New York Times, is eliminated from the op-ed. By mischaracterizing what WikiLeaks in fact did and labeling those imagined actions anarchy, Friedman is able to paint it as a dangerous other, just like China. A decentralized open network is a dangerous threat to what he concludes is the only thing standing between us and either anarchy or authoritarianism. I like his response because certainly Assange has shaken things up. He's controversial, and maybe we can talk a little bit about him. But he and many leakers have been most effective when they have worked with journalists, right? So initially when Assange created WikiLeaks, and I'll never forget the day when one of his co-partners contacted me on a chat channel to say, hey, we're doing this like new thing called WikiLeaks. And, you know, maybe you'd be interested, and maybe you want to study us. And I was like, whoa, I'm just too busy right now. I was finishing my first book. But I was really interested to see what would happen. Well, when they first created the wiki and put information, nothing happened. It has to do with this attentional economy, right? You can't just put stuff online and expect people to go. And in fact, they had some really interesting leaks online before 2010. But it was only with Collateral Murder, which was staged as a spectacle. They had a news conference. Assange toured. He was on Colbert Report. He was on CNN, that they were able to gain any traction. And later on in the year, he worked with a bunch of news organizations in order to coordinate these leaks. You need the kind of establishment players. So I'm going to go back to leaking and the importance of hackers. But really, the reason why they're so important is that there's so many threats to journalism always, historically and currently. And hackers, what they do is allow journalists to be more free and open in certain ways. And all of you here probably know that journalism is referred to as the fourth estate, which keeps institutions of power, notably the government, in check. Well, hackers are part of a domain which is being called the fifth estate, which is helping to keep journalists in check. And so they play a really important role, and I think they're going to play an increasing role. Now you might wonder, what are some of these threats to journalism? I can't mention all of them, there's many. And by threats to journalism, I mean kind of conditions that don't allow journalists to do their job adequately, that then affects the public. So obviously one that we know about very well has to do with what journalists don't cover, right? This was something that was tweeted recently that says PBS Evening Newscast aired more climate change segments than ABC, CBS, and NBC combined, right? That's remarkable, especially because those news networkers still command most eyeballs for populations over 35, right? This was the case, I would say, for questions of surveillance and encryption until Assange, Manning, Anonymous, and Snowden came along and flipped this all around, right? So that's one form. The other form I like, just because, you know, it feeds my most paranoid sensibilities, has to do with, you know, spy agencies planting journalists in news organizations. So this is a book written by Jules Boykoff in a wonderful book called The Suppression of Dissent. And this little segment has to do with how the CIA kind of implanted, I believe, 7 journalists in different news organizations, and then of course was working with others who can write stories that were sympathetic to you know, their agenda. So not surprisingly, and then the FBI also had similar relationships. The FBI contacted state-friendly journalists and editors to write you know, stories